So forensics final. So with the medical examiner, my case, the murder of Nicole Brown had medical examiner, uh, Dr. Irwin L. Golden, who's a forensic pathologist. He'd been doing his work for about 52 years, graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago. He primarily works in Los Angeles, California as a forensic pathologist. He performs autopsies, and in this case, performed the autopsy of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. He's a medical examiner and not a coroner, and because of this, he was able to perform autopsies because of his medical degree and board certification. And this is important to know in order to understand where the evidence from the autopsy comes from. It was especially important in the case of Nicole Brown's murder because there was a lot of criticism of the forensic team collecting evidence, so knowing who performed the autopsy and their credibility was crucial. So for the autopsy, when you start an autopsy, first the medical examiner looks at the body externally, looking at outer appearance, things like clothing, accessories, weight, height, sex, etc. After this, they look at the body by taking off the clothes and examining the skin, looking for GPR, injuries, other evidence that can help determine the cause. Along with this, the examiner looks at the extensive liver and rigor mortis and note their findings to help determine the time of death. After they've completed looking at the external examination, the examiner will use a scalpel and make a Y-shaped incision like you see here under the breast. After completing this incision, they'll open up the chest cavity, cut the ribs using rib shears like you see here, remove and weigh each of the major organs. Um, Scissors are usually used to disconnect the organs so that they can take them out. And after that, they weigh the organs, and weighing these organs allows the examiner to see if there's any suspicious occurrences going on in the organs that would cause them to weigh more. Tissue samples are also taken. A thermometer is stuck in the liver in order to determine body temperature and observe algor mortis. And after this, the stomach and its contents are examined. The location and appearance of these contents can help determine the time since the deceased person's last meal. Uh, After all these organs have been closely observed and recorded, the examiner will begin extracting bodily fluids like blood, urine, bile, eye fluid for testing, and then the examination of the brain follows this. The examiner will use a bone saw, like you see here, to precisely cut the cranial cap. They'll remove that cranial cap, and the brain is examined both inside the body and then removed, weighed, and recorded outside the body. The brain and other organs may need additional dissection, and they may be placed in formalin to preserve them. Finally, the rest of the organs will be placed back in the body. The body will be stitched up, and that's it. But each autopsy is unique because every death is unique. So a lengthy report is written for every autopsy with observations, diagnoses, and conclusions of the autopsy. In the case of Nicole Brown Simpson, on June 13th, 1994, uh, Nicole Brown was brutally murdered outside her home in Los Angeles, California. She was stabbed multiple times and found deceased at the scene. Prime suspect, her ex-husband O.J. Simpson, has testified or had testified a timeline with gaps in his alibi. It's estimated that Brown died sometime between 10:15 and 11 p.m. based on the timeline of events. Brown also came home from dinner prior to the murder, so before I do the autopsy, I can assume that there will be content within her digestive system. Brown was also found on her left side in the fetal position, so liver mortis should appear on that side of her body unless she was moved after she died. She was also clothed, and the weather of Los Angeles is relatively warm, so these may affect the processes of rigor, liver, and algor mortis, which we've got right here. So I performed the autopsy of Nicole Brown on June 14th, 1994 at 9 a.m. the day after. With her external examination, I noticed liver mortis, the faint blue-purple discoloration of liver mortis prominently on her left side. And this corroborates the position of how she was initially found. Picture that. It's a little graphic. This discoloration stayed upon pressure, so I can presume that Brown died over 8 hours ago. Liver mortis occurs when red blood cells seep into the lowest part of the body due to gravity, but Brown lost a great amount of blood, which explains why liver mortis was more faint on her body. I next observed rigor mortis, which is when calcium accumulates in the muscles and they grow stiff. Brown's body was relatively stiff in all areas, but there was still some flexibility, and this leads me to believe that the death occurred about 9 to 11 hours ago. Finally, I observed algor mortis, or the change in body temperature, by inserting a thermometer into Brown's liver. The temperature was 87 degrees Fahrenheit, and because the average human's temperature is 98.6, Brown had cooled off about 11 degrees since her death, and this leads me to believe that she died about 10 or 11 hours ago, uh, sometime between the hours of 10 and 11 p.m. last night. So, continuing with my external examination, I looked at the external injuries. The first one that I saw was an incised wound on the right side of her neck. You can see it right here. You can see it right here. And then I've got another picture of Nicole Brown. It's a little graphic. So you can see that right there too. So this wound is gaping and exposes the larynx and cervical uh, vertebral column. It was 5.5 inches in length and 2.5 inches deep. The wound is diagonally oriented, angulating towards the right earlobe, like you can see here and here. The edges of the wound are smooth and it is dark red purple. I also saw some other stab wounds on the other side, the left side of her neck. This consisted of 3 wounds, one at the top, 1/8 of an inch. It's superficial, it's a slit-like incision. A diagonally oriented incision wound that was about 1/2 inch in length and 1.5 to 2 inches deep. And then on the bottom here, 2C, uh, another diagonal stab wound that was about 7/8 of an inch and about 1 to 1.5 inches in depth. Each of these was about 1 inch away from this large incision right there on the right side of her neck. I also saw 3 wounds on her scalp. One wound was diagonally oriented on the left parietal scalp. It was 1/2 inch in length and had a depth of about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. It did not penetrate the skull, so it was not fatal, though. Another wound is located on the right parietal occipital area of the head, right here, 3B. Uh, it was 3/16 of an inch in length, and it did not penetrate the skull as well. The last injury on the head was a blunt force injury on the right side of the head, 3C right here. It was 4 inches above the auditory canal, and it is about 1 inch by 1 inch in area, and it's violet red or purple in color. It did not break the skin, it was just a bruise. There were also some injuries to her hand. On her right hand, there was a incised wound of about 5/8 of an inch on the knuckle of her right index finger. It broke the skin and there was some bleeding. And then there was an injury to her left hand. There was 1/2 inch of a superficial incised cut. It's red, brown in color and at the base of her ring finger. And these 2 cuts on her hand match other self-defense wounds. So then I moved on to the internal examination, starting with the nervous system. When I looked at the nervous system, there was a small red-brown abrasion underneath the scalp. There wasn't any evidence of a hemorrhage or direct damage to the brain. Um, I also looked at the spinal cord, which was near that big neck laceration, but even that surprisingly had no evidence of damage or sharp force injuries, even though it was that close to the large incision. And the brain weighed 1,200 grams. So the heart weighed 280 grams and appeared intact, but there was very little blood found in the cardiac chambers, which makes sense because of how much blood she lost. There were also sections of the left and right coronary arteries taken, and that showed that they appeared to be thin-walled. Um, there was also an injury to the left internal jugular vein and left common carotid artery from the incision, and this is where a majority of the bleeding happened. Finally, I looked at the respiratory system. The right lung weighed 330 grams, and the left lung weighed 300 grams. I saw hemorrhage in the tissue adjacent to the neck organs due to the deep incision on the right side. There's no damage to the hypopharynx, epiglottis, or larynx, though. Some other evidence I collected from the body when I did the external exam initially. Brown was wearing a short black dress that was blood-stained. She also had a black pair of panties on, but uh, there was not evidence of cuts or tears on the panties. Um, she Brown was also appeared to be well nourished with no tattoos, deformities, or amputations, and she had two linear surgical scars found underneath each breast, measuring 2 inches in length. After looking at all this evidence, my approximated time of death would be from 10:15 to 11 p.m. of June 13th, 1994. The manner of death would be a homicide, cause of death, multiple sharp force injuries, and the mechanism of death, exsanguination. The death of Nicole Brown can be attributed to the multiple sharp force injuries, with the deep incised wound and other stab wounds on her neck being the most fatal. The sharp force injuries of the common carotid artery and internal jugular vein caused the most fatal exsanguination or bleeding. The injuries of the scalp and hands were superficial and not fatal, and the wounds of the hands, like I said, match patterns of self-defense wounds, again showing how this was most likely a homicide. And here are my sources. Thank you.